Scales and Pages. Written by Nikolai Weiskopf. Read for you by Adam R. Watson. Story 2. The Changing Scale. Valstus did not revel in the icy winds beneath their wings. They ignored the anticipation and the giddy thrill of diving thousands of feet. They pushed them away to the back of their minds. Even as they smashed through ocean waves, frigid waters replaced the icy air. They gulped salty water and speared sweet fish on their fangs, then surged up and flew onwards, their silver eyes fixed on a single destination: a paper mill. After a dead sleep, they'd wasted precious hours and cast every kind of tracking spell. All led to the same silent darkness. Even worse, they'd scoured the cavern. Archaeus had left nothing behind. Not a single whisker, toenail, or drop of sweat. If they couldn't find the books or the mage, then they'd start with something nearly every cookbook and grimoire had in common: the paper pages. High above the sea, a rush of colder winds passed over their scales, and burned air in their snout warned them they'd soon meet a storm. They refused to change direction. Charging through miles in minutes, the horizon filled with black clouds. The relentless rain drummed inside their ears. Their magic itched to claim and play with the wild flashing lightning. Their heartbeat answered the thunder. Storms were a second home to storm dragons. The temptation to stop, to play, and take comfort all tugged at them. A simple, infuriating truth burned away those desires. Valstus had already slept for a week. They sucked in air till their lungs ached and roared into the innocent clouds. The furious sound scattered clouds in every direction. A clear blue sky scar cut through the black. Guilty thoughts clawed at their mind. Valstus refused to stop. They sensed a rising wind current, dipped down and bolstered it with their magic, tucked their wings, and shot forward. They knew why Archaeus had gained a 7-day lead. Mana exhaustion. A condition that could kill mortal mages but forced dragons to slumber. The catalyst for Valstus's rage was their own decisions. The cost of the gemstone, drinking so many potions, and not digesting raw magic in their guts. They were lucky to have the books they had. If Archaeus hadn't been obsessed with grimoires, he could have waited for Valstus to fall asleep on their feet. How long had he been watching? How many of their decisions had he predicted? How was he hiding the grimoires? Why couldn't they feel which direction to fly? What was he using them for? The answers to their questions were uncertain, untrustworthy, and unpleasant, all of which pushed them to fly faster. Valstus willed the water off their scales, shaped the surrounding air into a wedge. Without added weight or opposing force, they cut through the sky like a whistling arrow. The added burst of speed pulled at them until their scales ached, a pain they chose and accepted. They raced the sun for hours, and only slowed when a familiar forest took shape in the distance. Releasing the spells and throwing out their wings slowed them down enough to notice a clearing. They shot towards it, and landed in a crash that left clawed craters behind. The torn earth threw up scents that brought back pleasant memories. Fresh, sweet sap from a felled tree. Salty sweat on their brow from hauling logs. The dirty lyrics of a working song. Good times enjoyed in a different body. Valstus knew if they wanted help instead of screaming scattered hostile lumberjacks, they couldn't stroll in as they were now. Dragons were elements made flesh. Each one used their magic to hide, to hunt, and some indulged in chaotic mischief. Valstus recognized shape-shifting magic as the fastest and best way to grow their bookish horde. They combined their magic and the ambient magic of the world around them, transitioning into whatever they needed for the book they'd wanted. A day as a mouse, 1 week as a pigeon, decades as a scribe. The form did not matter. The stories, the magic, the knowledge, anything and everything written on the pages mattered. All that truth and all those memories didn't stop their guts from bubbling like a witch's boiling cauldron. They'd spent decades in their full dragon form to craft the gemstone library. This first transition promised to be interesting. The forest trees swayed with each deep, deliberate breath they took. Eventually they swallowed the ball of anxiety wedged in their throat, gathered their thoughts to shape the magic, and began the transition. Immediately, the world's magic slid off their scales. The failed attempt to change muscle and bone tore at both, forcing them to growl in pain. Valstus pushed the spell, and their body refused again. The clash forced their wings to twitch uncontrollably. The comforting icy cold instead forced them to shiver until it shook them off their feet. Collapsing on their side, throwing up leaves and twigs, birds furiously tweeted their displeasure. The sharp details of the world blurred. The only relief was that both magics dulled the transition's pain to an ache. Then, a single scale fell from their snout. Valstus pushed the spell harder, and more followed. Wind and light rushed in all directions as they became more magic than flesh. Imagining a new face and form turned the dulled ache to needles. Waves stabbed them from snout to tail as their body tried and failed to become flesh again. Growling at the resistance, Valstus mentally scrambled for another way. The face and form they'd made before burst through their memories. Memories attached to it washed away the waves of needling pains. In one breath, all scaled flesh transitioned to raw magic. Sapphire light and winter wind filled that forest clearing. A second breath. All raw magic transitioned to solid, lightless flesh. Valstus had thought the word interesting would be enough to describe their first transition in decades. Flexing fingers ending in shortened talons, the weight of breasts instead of scales on their chest, the flattened, rounded edges of teeth instead of fangs, looking up to tree branches rather than meeting them at eye level. They were dragon in a form that didn't fit the word. It wasn't interesting. It was chaos. They curled in on themselves, cradled their library hoard, and whispered to it. "You will be whole," they said between tears. "I will organize you," they said between shallow breaths. "I promise," they said in steadier tones. All these sincere words didn't stop their guts from turning. Their head pounded. Also, everything itched. Primal instinct pushed to stay still, to wait out all sensations. Experience screamed at them to do the opposite. They started with their tail. The smallest swishing motions caused the shrunk scales to creak like rusty door hinges. They flexed their clawed feet and ripped up more damp earth. Every joint cracked. Their reshaped bones found their proper places. Hours of effort, limb by limb, they worked. Valstus jumped for joy when they finally stayed standing, and only remained standing when their knees collapsed because of the oak that caught them instead of the mud. Accepting the transition required facing who they'd become. Valstus leaned against the smooth-barked oak and looked around. The sun had melted the pale hoarfrost their wild winter winds had made. It was exactly what they needed. When they curled their clawed fingers, the water answered. It left behind impurities and swirled into a glassy sheet. They remembered being tall for a human, then noticed the smoky white curling horns and mentally corrected. Humanoid. Valstus stepped closer and refused to blink. Their hair barely reached their shoulders. Strands of white and blue flowed in and over each other like a frozen waterfall. Brushing strands behind their horns, they noticed their skin was the same sapphire as their scales. She stepped closer and noticed the edges of their eyes and corners of their jaw had familiar smoky white scales. Indignant panic threatened to make them scream, fearing they'd failed, until they remembered their old, useful mantra. Who I was, who I am again. I choose this, she thought. Who I was, who I am again. I choose this, she said quietly. Who I was, who I am again. I choose this, she said again loudly, and willed the water to harden. She and her reflection touched fingertips, embraced palms. She smiled at herself, and only just realized she was nude. A moment of self-admiration mixed with sadness at the lack of sapphire scales. Then came the practical question. Where could she find clothes? She grinned at the idea of sauntering into the paper mill, all the workers' eyes wide with disbelief, their jaws dropped in confusion. Agatric's annoyed buzz, the only sound as Valstus waved without a care. She chuckled at the thought of her old friend's antennae, twitching in disapproval. The memory of Archaeus's smug smile flashed into focus. His constant condescension echoed in her mind. All of it ended her amusement. The Archmage knew she was coming for her grimoires. If he had an easy way to track her, it only gave him more advantages. She refused to give the old bastard more than he'd already taken. With a thought, she shaped wind and water spells to collect every shed scale. Fingers of wind plucked them from the torn earth. Her watery mirror split into several streams and washed away mud. In the late-day sun, they shimmered and reflected the hidden colors of light in all directions. Fingering the facets of her gemstone, she found the one she'd made for bookbinding. Over 1,000 scales entered that facet. She rolled the gem and found the other facet she needed. With a thought, she pulled out drab gray and earthy brown fabric bolts, alongside spools of plain white thread. She pulled memories of her years spent apprenticed to a master tailor. His lessons guided her needle while she cast spectral hands to hold, measure, and cut fabric. She only stopped to wipe the sweat from her brow. In a few hours, she had a simple skirt and tunic. She closed her eyes against the impulse to throw them on and rush to the paper mill. Instead, she conjured enchanted ink and brush. She started with the inside of the hem. Line by line, she painted earth and stone runes. One silenced her steps. Another filled her footprints. Across the high neckline, she painted runes of air and light. Together, they would obscure her features and make her words forgettable. An idle question raced across her mind. Should the friend she needed be exempt? Valstus bit her lip. Centuries of different forms had shown her that betrayal came in many forms, but refusing to trust anyone wasted time she didn't have. She added lines to the runes that would allow her to disable their magics. With that done, she could move on. She found a well-walked path and tried to work through her sour mood. After all her effort, magical and physical, her horns and tail still didn't cooperate. She'd chosen styles that should have made it easier, and yet when putting the clothes on, she'd heard straining fabrics and stitches. Why should she bother planning if nothing went as planned? Every answer she thought of annoyed her. Grinding her teeth filled the air around her head with tiny crackles of lightning. Her mood only changed when she stepped to the forest's edge. The paper mill was both familiar and strange. The grind of saw blades, snorting draft horses, flowing, ordered lines of incoming lumber and outgoing carts heavy with paper. All familiar. The scale of it was strange. Agatrice had explosively expanded her operation. Valstus's reflexive smile shrank. Her friend's success would make finding Arceus even harder. We thank you for listening to this story. Creating the dragons, books, and magic and shenanigans has been a joy. Find more of Nikolai's stories and Adam's content in the links enclosed. This is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents either are the product of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons living or dead, events, or locales is entirely coincidental. All rights reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced in any form or by an electronic or mechanical means, including information storage and retrieval systems, without permission in writing from the publisher, except by a reviewer who may quote brief passages in the review. No generative artificial intelligence, AI, was used in the writing of this work. The author and narrator expressly prohibit any entity from using this publication for purposes of training AI technologies to generate text, audio, video, including without limitation technologies that are capable of generating works in the same style or genre as this publication. The author reserves all rights to license uses of this work for generative AI training and development of machine learning language models.